We see these beautiful pictures at night from the decks of these two U.S. Navy vessels in the eastern Mediterranean. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, "I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons." And they are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments making what is for them a brief flight over to this airfield. What did they hit? What are you convinced that they hit?
Well, they are beautiful photographs, but you have to understand that that's beauty in the destruction of other men and individuals and machines. And they are destructive weapon systems in flight.
So this week we're talking about Paul Virilio and Jean Baudrillard, who both write a lot about war and film. And you know who else likes war and film? Our good friend Josh Christianson.
Howdy, folks.
Okay, so usually what we do on the Magnificast is the first bit of time is allocated to catching up and seeing like what everyone's been doing in the past week. So let's catch up right now. Josh, what have you been doing?
I've been working. I've been overcoming illness and using Obamacare to the fullest extent that I can at this moment. So that's been pretty neat. I have to appreciate that while that lasts, apparently.
Yeah, for sure. Josh, what do you do? Like, what's your job?
So it is media related. I manage or co-manage a video department at a wedding factory, like a photo and video company. So I used to edit a lot, but now apparently I have to do manager type things, which is very strange. I didn't imagine winding up in middle management, but here I am.
It's where you're from, it's where you belong.
Yep. Completely. Dean would be the expert on this.
Yeah. So you and Dean know each other. Do you guys want to explain how?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah. Josh and I met at our undergraduate school, Cornerstone University, a leading evangelical Ivy League school, known for building lives that matter. And we were freshmen, we lived in the same building, and Josh was like the token guy who was always watching like weird art house films that like your residential assistant would tell you should like use your discernment about whether or not you should like be in Josh's room that night. So we became fast friends. Josh was a philosophy major. He came to the Institute for Christian Studies for a while, so we're buds. We lived together a little bit. Did I miss anything?
No, yeah, that's the saga. I mean, it's all true. Yeah. I sort of like, yeah. I feel like I've sort of clung on to Dean's coattails. Like started off in like the film department at Cornerstone, and then Dean didn't start off as a philosophy major, but he sort of like yanked me into that department, and then yeah. I think it worked out.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Cool. Dean, what have you been up to?
Well, so right now it's Holy Week. It won't be by the time people hear this, I guess, but I've been doing a lot of not drinking alcohol, and I live in Canada, so I'm an American citizen and I serve coffee at a local coffee shop. So I've also been fielding a lot of questions about Donald Trump starting the Third World War from concerned Canadians. So that's been a sort of constant conversational topic here.
How does that usually go? Like, listen, you're from America. Please explain to me this.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much always how it goes. I have like a stock group of kind Canadian coffee patrons who come in and regularly ask me for my, the hot take on my homeland. They sort of view it as like a very exotic neighbor, or like the analogy I always use is like a neighbor down the street that just has like, it's like 7-month-old laundry like still on the line and like Christmas lights out in the house, and they're like always trying to figure out what's going on, but like it would be impolite to just ask directly, so they just ask people who kind of know them or something. So I'm that person.
Whoa, what an honor.
Yeah, I'm the mutual friend.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a lot of work, actually, to explain that to people at your job.
Yeah, it's mostly only a lot of work when, like, it turns out the person I'm talking to is not, like, a standard leftist, and then it is just like, okay, here's your coffee, like, I'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Matt, what have you been doing?
I've just been doing, like, regular teaching stuff. So my son has been sick. That's been sort of, like, the all-consuming thing in my life right now. He gets ear infections kind of a lot, and they make him feel like the worst. So like a few days he kind of had a fever, and we took him to the doctor and got antibiotics and all kinds of stuff. But like, so he's been on antibiotics for a few days, and today I was like carrying him around, and we were like out eating dinner somewhere, and like my arm felt really wet, and he like literally pooped on me. That's what happened. That's what like really happened today. The antibiotics, make it like hurt his stomach, I guess. So I like had poop all over my arm, and it was just the worst.
That sounds awful for everybody.
Yeah, it was 100% terrible. It was also very funny.
Well, good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to laugh about it. It was good. I did have poop on myself in public, and I can't think of any more hilarious situations, actually. Yeah, it was bad. He's like feeling better now. Post poop made him feel a lot better, I think. So it was good.
Well, it's good you could be there for him in that moment.
Yeah, for sure. It was great.
I also saw on your Twitters that you're getting ready to do the annual why squids are cool teaching lesson. That sounds intriguing.
Oh yeah, that was this morning. So I have a class. I don't know. I try to work in something about octopi. Sorry, excuse me. Octopi.
You're excused.
And vampire squids, because those are the best things ever. Because one time I read a book called Vampira Toothus Infernalis by Willem Flusser, and it changed my life for the better, I guess. Anyways, it's like such an intense interest for me. I try to work it into basically every class I teach. And this morning, I was teaching a class that's called Persuasion and Argumentation. And we're going through this book right now called Persuasive Rhetoric, and it's by a guy named Ian Bogost, who writes about video games and rhetoric. So we played this game over the last few days called Octodad. Octodad is an amazing game. Check it out. Here's the premise of the game. You're an octopus, but nobody knows you're an octopus, and also you're a dad. And you have to kind of keep your octopusness a secret from your children and your wife. Anyways, so it's a funny game because the controls are really goofy, and it makes you think about how weird your body is and about ability and disability. So we talked about that in class, and it was cool. It was a good conversation for the most part. I don't know. Any chance I can talk about squids or octopi, I take it. Seize life by the tentacles.
So I think some preliminary notes about Virilio would help here. I wrote a little blog intro to Virilio a little while back that I'll link in the show notes. But basically, like I said earlier, so Virilio is a French Catholic anarchist. He spent his life talking about war technologies and architecture and speed and politics and a bunch of other stuff. His dad was an Italian communist and his mom was Catholic. He converted because he was inspired by this movement of worker priests in France, and worker priests are very cool. If you don't know what they are, you should spend a Google afternoon on worker priests. So Matt and I both did work on Virilio in our academic work. We used him in a paper that we wrote together, and this is kind of an excuse to just nerd out about him together a little bit. Hopefully it'll be clear at the end of this episode why Virilio is really important right now, and not just we're not just talking about him because Matt and I keep citing him in our work, but maybe we could talk a little bit at the beginning here about why Virilio is important for Christian leftists in particular, since he's a Christian leftist in himself. So, do you guys have any preliminary ideas maybe about why Virilio, like why should Christians and leftists and Christian leftists care about Virilio still?
I think what's great about Virilio is that he just gets it, you know? He's like really good at describing the world and about the effects of speed and technology on the world. And I think that's why we should pay attention to him. He's an astute describer of what's kind of going on, and that's helpful. I like that about him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is my first time reading him. Like I've mostly like interacted with him mostly through your guys' work, and this is the first time, but I don't know, especially in this book, he really makes explicit a lot of connections I feel like I've been orbiting for a few years, but never really, made them connect. Metal hit metal or whatever. So
yeah, I think that's what Virilio is really good at, actually, is making these connections that you wouldn't otherwise see. Like a lot of his stuff is about relationships, even in the titles. So the book we'll talk about today, War and Cinema, that's one, but one of his most famous is called Speed and Politics. So he like draws these things together that you wouldn't, think of maybe right away. And I really appreciate that. Like you were saying, Matt, he sort of just gets it in an intuitive sense and in an analytical sense. I find him like not the best writer, but like there are just these nuggets where when he hits the point, it just feels like it hits you in a way that you're like, oh, I actually, like, I've been thinking that for a while, even though I didn't know that I thought that.
Yeah, I agree. He's definitely not the best writer, but he just describes like two different discourses that are happening sort of side by side and just kind of lets you draw these connections between them. So in War and Cinema, I mean, he just describes like the history of photography and cinematography, and then also the history of warfare, and then just like sort of their co-evolution. And so it's so fascinating the way he does it. But yeah, definitely not like an easy reader. There's a little bit of a learning curve to figuring out kind of what he's saying.
Yeah, for sure. One interesting thing just about like maybe making the kind of Christian connection more explicit is like you don't see it on the face of a lot of his work, but if you know it's there, it's almost undeniable, and it comes through in these weird ways. So he'll randomly quote a pope or a saint, or he'll use an example of, here's the thing that happened in the history of whatever, War and Cinema, and for some reason the church said this or did not say this about it. Like he'll have these almost throwaway lines, but they're like really important to him. Like if you read interviews with him, he'll kind of make reference to, like, anytime someone says, aren't you really intimidated by the kinds of things that you're analyzing? It seems really scary, like the world's a crazy place. And he always just has these really simple replies where he's like, well, like, I'm a Catholic, so I don't know, I don't really like worry about it too much, or like I just like go to church, so it's fine.
Well, so War and Cinema is the book. The subtitle is also very interesting. The logistics of perception. Dean or Josh, I don't know, if you guys had to like sum up what this book is about, maybe in just a few sentences, like how would you do it?
Oh man, like I think it's like that the co-evolution of photography and media in the 21st century isn't merely coincidental with the development of weapons technology, that they're sort of interlinked. And I mean, Virilio, I think his stance is like that's really for the worst.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably a pretty good description. Yeah, I like the way that you said that too. It's like not accidental. These two technologies about vision and warfare are tied in an integral way, and that should be pretty troubling to us, I guess. Or like it makes you feel like strangely, I don't know, not at ease about like how much one might enjoy cinema or television. Like it's like kind of like it's the result of like a history of warfare and a lot of like death and blood and guts and stuff.
Yeah, reading this book has been kind of an existential crisis for me. So
yeah, maybe you could say more about that, Josh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the few of you that kind of know anything about my online persona or know me personally, like I am a film obsessive, and even then, like sort of a obsessed with movies about war and violence, and I don't know, it's so easy to like sort of build an identity out of that, and then reading something like this is like, oh, it's all bad. It's actually kind of like contributing to, everything I sort of hate in the world as, professed leftist at this point. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to turn out to be a productive tension, but it's definitely like, oh, I've been putting a lot of energy into something that isn't really great, I guess. But, I don't know. It's a little more, both more and less ambivalent than that, maybe.
Yeah, well, so Matt, you were talking about the subtitle, "The Logistics of Perception." That's a really important point, I think, too. And I struggled a little bit reading it as well, Josh, because I really like TV a lot. And I'm not I have no sophisticated opinions about them or anything, or about television. I just love it. I watched Big Brother Canada tonight, and the person I wanted to get evicted got evicted, and I was so pumped, and I just was frothing at the mouth, and it was awesome. And yeah, it's the idea that war and cinema together change the way that we perceive things and perceive ourselves in relation to others, and even just being able to look into a box and see someone else's life, whether narratively construed or not, is such a crazy thing. Crazier than we intuitively think, being a kind of generation that has grown up with screens already to some degree.
Yo, so as you're saying that, I was thinking about how messed up Big Brother is, that it makes you actually you're on the side of the landlord. That seems bad, right? I think that everyone should stay in the house for free. I think they should squat it.
Man, there is a lot to be said about Big Brother, especially because it is different in every country in very interesting ways. So in some countries, the people inside the house vote each other out over the course of the thing, but it's very internal, and you're kind of a voyeur, just watching it, and you might be able to contribute to the game here and there, but mostly you're just kind of seeing it unfold. But then in other countries, the populace votes for who leaves and who stays. So it's almost more celebrity driven, and then occasionally they do these Big Brother crossovers. So someone who won in one context tries to play in another context, and oh my gosh, it is just a Virilio reader's playground. I feel like that TV show. Not mine, because I don't think about it when I watch it. I just enjoy it.
Nice. That's good. I mean, that's fine. Good for you. Well, I guess digressing back to Virilio for a hot second. So in the very the opening of the book, I think is super fascinating and a helpful descriptive, because what Virilio is doing is laying out sort of a sort of a history of media and history of warfare that sets them up to be about sort of the same thing, and that same thing is perception. It's about making lines of visibility between two different opposing sides. And that's the most fascinating insight I think I've ever heard. And the development of hot air balloons with cameras and other things with cameras that fly. Super fascinating. So describing battlefields as sites of strategic perception is I think kind of mind blowing to me.
Man, we'll get into this, but in the preface he says this thing where he says, if what is perceived is already lost, it becomes necessary to invest in concealment what used to be invested in simple exploitation of one's available forces. And that change is so massive. If you can perceive it, it's already done for. That's a weird, it makes more sense with respect to the military, I think, right? Because, or now at least, because it's who hasn't seen the Predator movies or something at this point? But when you start thinking about that, even in terms of cinema, right? That once you've perceived it, it's already gone by. That's I don't know. It's very deep, that kind of connection. Yeah. So I think one way of drawing what Virilio's talking about with visibility and invisibility, one way of drawing that into contemporary discussions is to talk about the bombing that happened in Afghanistan So there was the mother of all the mother of all bombs was dropped. The mom bomb in Afghanistan. It's the largest non-nuclear weapon ever used, apparently to date, and it mimics these daisy cutter bombs that were used in the Iraq War, but like on a way bigger scale, I guess. So the whole point, they said, the Department of Defense or whatever said, was to drop it on these tunnels that are being used by ISIS. And it's interesting to think about it in terms of what Virilio's after, because it's like if ISIS could be seen, the U.S. would have already like droned them to hell or something. But that's why they have to use these tunnels. So to drop the bomb on these tunnels is to kind of like draw out, these people that they can't otherwise see into a field of vision, and also to kind of subvert that concealment that's meant to escape. What Virilio says, which is a sort of military site where once you're seen, like what's perceived is already lost.
Yeah, let me just butt in right here with another quote from the book. This is again from the preface, The Sight Machine. This is at almost the very end, and it's okay. It's kind of building on what you're saying here, right? The mom bomb gets dropped not for the killing of insurgents or whatever, but for like visibility, like driving them out. So Virilio says this, in a technician's version of an all-seeing divinity, ever ruling out accident and surprise, the drive is on for a general system of illumination that will allow everything to be seen and known at every moment in every place. And the mom bomb is just that. I mean, this strategy is about that. It's about figuring out ways to see one's enemy when they are, trying to conceal themselves. So I think that this kind of demonstrates how Virilio is so helpful in understanding strategies in war and kind of unpacking these like military and news events. I heard about I heard about the Syrian strike on Twitter, and I heard about the strike that happened today, the mom bomb. Also on Twitter, and you just think about it's a bomb, it's a military act, but you don't ever really think about I guess what the strategic value of those attacks are. And that's I guess why Virilio is important to me, or helpful to me as a person trying to understand the world. As a Christian, as a leftist, all of those things.
Yeah, I think too. One crazy thing about this is you get a sort of easy narrative from some people who are criticizing Trump, rightly, Trump should be criticized, but there's an easy narrative where it's like, oh, this is just like he wanted to drop the biggest bomb that could ever have been dropped, and I don't know, I don't really know how much control Donald Trump actually has on deciding what bombs get dropped. He's probably not flipping through a phone book of weapons and just trying them out, but nevertheless, there's something to why this particular bomb and why this particular scale, and Virilio does try to kind of help you see, why would that have been developed in the first place. It's not like they researched it after Donald Trump became president. This is a bomb that was available to Barack Obama, so I think that's a good way to get deeper into it. Virilio's tracing the ways in which these kinds of events aren't actually contingent on the vision of one person necessarily. They're the result of a very complicated and very weird kind of way that humans have, in some parts of the world, decided to organize themselves.
Yeah. I guess on this point about narrative, Josh, a question I think I'd be interested in hearing you talk about, since you are a film guy. There's a term or a phrase that Virilio uses, he says dictator as director. How do you see? Do you think that phrase, that dictator as director phrase, plays out or applies to this sort of situation unfolding now in Syria?
Absolutely. Yeah. So contrasting with the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, which I feel had sort of an actual strategic use. Outside of the spectacle, or that's what we just talked about, but the Tomahawk strike on the 7th, that's, I don't know, completely spectacular. There was no strategic whatever. It was sort of this purely reactive thing, and the big result is that Trump looks really good in the mainstream American press right now. I mean, you had all these quote unquote like hashtag resistance guys calling him presidential for launching some Tomahawk missiles at a patch of dirt in Syria.
Yeah.
And
maybe we you know, when you're saying that, I'm starting to like think about at least the attack in Syria on the airfield as less of a military maneuver and more as like a director kind of like directing something like a publicity stunt, public relations ad. At least it feels that way, right? Like there's like this nice so I mentioned this in the intro, but there's like this quote about Trump where he's very convicted about the Syrian women and children and the babies. Yeah. And like, so there's like this really like moral panic about doing something. And then there's even like a little bit further in the past about Assad and chemical weapons. So there's like this like strong motivating force. And then, he moves to do something that's spectacular that gets like everyone like just wild on Twitter and everywhere else, and then all of a sudden he emerges as being someone like presidential. Like that is like cinematic as hell.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And not only that, like it got soundtracked by Brian Williams, right? Like he said that he thought of Leonard Cohen.
The Cohen quote. Oh,
that is such an incredible example of just the way in which cinema even colors how we look at war, right? Like there's just a song that pops into your head such that you could deliver this kind of elegy about it or something.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, further harping on like just so we have this like entire industry that's like trying to spin it as cinematic when it's actually just the most trite melodrama, right? This is somehow like adding sort of a wrinkle to that thing. So Trump came out and he's like, oh, they're killing these beautiful babies with sarin gas. Like apparently the primary motivating factor, and I guess I can't really verify this, but like most things with Trump, even if it didn't happen, it's still true. But that he even got concerned in the first place because Ivanka was upset over it. Sweet baby Ivanka. Daddy,
descending levels of babies.
Yep. It's babies all the way down.
Yeah, the babies care about the babies, so the biggest baby of the land has to drop the bomb on other people's babies. So that's basically, this is a world of babies.
That's the transitive property of babies right there.
Like another just side note, you can totally cut this out, but so I just finished The Sopranos for the first time, and there's this like, and I don't know, I don't think there's been a better like piece of American media that really illustrates the banality of evil than the 6 seasons of the Sopranos. But like towards the spoiler alert, I guess. But I'll just go with the show's a million years old. If you haven't seen it or absorbed all of it through various means by now, like, where have you been? But yeah, towards the end of the series, like, this through line has been Tony Soprano seeing a therapist. And so she's, like, trying to convince herself that she's actually helping him, but it's been 6 years of him just doing the same shit, but just, like, slightly more self-aware about it. But not really. But she like reads this study about how like sociopaths actually use talk therapy as a way to sharpen their skills, and they sort of mention like they'll demonstrate their humanity by gushing over animals and babies, and like she just realizes that like that's seems to be the only thing that Tony Soprano has cared about throughout everything was animals and babies. And I mean, even to the point where in like halfway through the series, he kills a man because he killed a horse or something. Like he had no other like business motivator to it. It was just like a horse died, so he had to kill this guy.
This is a Nietzschean moment.
Yep.
On the one hand, that's appalling. On the other hand, like I get it.
Yeah, exactly.
The question is, which hand is Matt shaking at which time?
I mean, just like seeing animals suffer is like something I can't abide. It's like the worst thing for me.
I know. Oh man, I hear that.
I might be a sociopath also. I don't know.
Completely. Yeah. But I mean, and that's a whole other thing with how we even relate to, we're so inured to human suffering on film, but as soon as you show a dog getting killed on screen, like, that's the turning point, right?
No, for sure. I mean, like in video games, like a gazillion bad guys, yes, I will kill all of them. Like one dog, no. No. No way.
Right.
Virilio actually mentions that at one point. The desensitization to death on screen. Hold on, I'm gonna find it because there's probably something to say about that. Hold on a second. Oh, I found it. It's on 51. Yeah, so Virilio talks about this on page 51. He says, this kind of fear... I should back up. He's talking about like when the famous example of when this train is coming at the audience and they all get up and run away because they think that they're going to get crushed. So he says, this kind of fear, akin to the sense of speed that people seek on roller coasters, did not disappear, but simply became more pernicious as the audience learnt to control its nervous reactions and began to find death amusing. In Westerns, death had to become more and more common, and the body count started, just as in those army headquarters, where a high number of casualties and a depletion of men and material were considered to be marks of a commander's talent or personality, even proofs of the orthodox nature of his art. There's like such a very chilling connection there.
Right. It's sort of this weird way of like, I mean, I feel like a lot of the orthodoxy and like, maybe not media studies proper, but like studies of pop culture or whatever, is that violent images don't necessarily lead to actual violence.
Stuart Hall he has an essay called Encoding Decoding. He says something about this too. He says like violent images violent images don't beget more violence, but what they tell us is like our understanding of violence. Like violent images tell us about like the way that we think about how violence works or how it is. And I think there's a certain congruence there with like what Virilio is saying here too, is that it's about desensitization, and it's about like the ways that the representation of violence and war sort of symbolize something to us in one way or another. But over time, I guess we build up tolerances to these things, and we have to find like more and more spectacular representations of violence,
or at least like the way of perceiving something like death. In a film, when you could like put it in reverse, right? Where a person who gets shot, like the bullet comes out of them and goes back into the gun. Like it's a kind of world that we've learned to understand is not how things operate out here or something. But what Virilio is trying to say, I think, is that actually we do kind of think that the world out here is a lot like cinema. Oh,
completely. I mean, especially when it comes to like military operations. Maybe especially since Vietnam, like, post-Vietnam. So, like, the Gulf War was essentially a, weeks-long reality show where Americans got to watch, big explosions on CNN.
So this is like the exact right time for me to interject with another well-known French philosopher named Jean Baudrillard.
Hell yeah.
Y'all said the trigger word. You said Gulf War, and then I have to say Jean Baudrillard. So here it is. So Jean Baudrillard is important for this discussion because he's sort of like the. I mean, not quite, but he's kind of like the anti-Virilio in a lot of ways. Like he's a disaffected Marxist. He's not a Christian. He's a nihilist, sort of. And he still has like tons of these similar thoughts about like war and cinema and simulation, but they're like way more negative than Virilio. Like where Virilio is just like, well, the eschaton. Baudrillard is like, yeah, and we're all gonna die. But so on this note about like representation and like how we understand, or like the way that we think that like the world isn't like cinema, or the world is like cinema. Baudrillard just like he just throws his arms up in the air at this point, and like I think like 3 or 4 essays we could probably cite, and he just says like, no, they're the same thing. Like real, fake, yep, that's all the same thing to me. And while that sounds kind of silly, he makes some pretty convincing points throughout his work. I don't know. Should I talk about one of them?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Yep.
yeah, he's really famous for talking about the Gulf War. He has an essay called "The Gulf War Did Not Take Place." And Josh, just like you said, basically a weeks-long reality show about bombing people and rolling over them in tanks. So what's really interesting is Jean Baudrillard wrote this essay, but he was like asked to write this essay. It was like sort of commissioned by somebody. And Baudrillard is like, okay, sounds good. I'm going to go to where the war is. And then they're like, oh, the Gulf? And he's like, no, TV. And so he's like, it's for him, the Gulf War did not take place. Doesn't mean that like nobody died or there's no like imperialism. It means that like that the war didn't take place like it did on TV. That there's like, this sort of chasm between the real and the simulated, but like to us, we only know what we see and like we only can accept what we see, and we're kind of like held captive by what we see. Like that's the references back to the quote I said in the beginning. Baudrillard adds like another level of complexity that I think there's some congruence with Virilio, but then like it's also 1,000 times more depressing. There's even this other example that Baudrillard gives about the Romanian Revolution and the ways like activists used like the images of like dead bodies in a staged mass grave to bolster people like to oust the government. Baudrillard has a lot of things to say about death in cinema as well, and I think we can see all of these things again playing out in the ways Donald Trump might be both dictator and director of these conflicts.
Yeah, I wonder, I want to throw this one at Josh, kind of on the director line, because I think that is such an incredible thing. And for Virilio, it's not like a metaphor. It isn't like, oh, Hitler is like a director. He says, like, I mean, he does say perhaps it would be better to think of them in this way, but he goes on to establish that connection as way more than just kind of aside. So he notes that like Hitler loved cinema like an incredible amount, and he also like as the Nazis were losing decisively, he like diverted a ton of resources from the military to like stage these massive like films, and it was insane. Like it was strategically bad.
Right. No, the one story that it's like almost unbelievable where he actually tried to remake an actual battle that happened in Norway. He was willing to divert like just a ridiculous amount of resources to remake this battle the Nazis won to sort of boost morale. And like, I don't know how film history would play out if it actually had been made, but yeah, what wound up happening was like the British heard about it and we're about to send the Navy to like fuck it up. But swears, sorry.
No, it's good. That's gonna stay. Yeah. It's gonna stay. Don't worry.
It's gonna stay. All right.
Well, on that note, since we've transgressed that barrier already, I'm gonna bring up a name that causes swear words in my brain, Ronald Reagan. That's
my Reagan noise.
Virilio like goes on to talk about how like it isn't just obvious fascists like Mussolini and Hitler who are directors, but like Reagan too is a director, albeit he's directing a different film in a way. And I was just thinking a lot about this, like. So Hitler is kind of almost like an auteur director, right? He has this kind of grand vision, and everyone is supposed to fall in line and like help him sort that out. Reagan is not as much that way. He's a Hollywood star, right, who kind of tries to bring stardom around the world. He creates these other films that get exported, etc. But he's still directing kind of like a really crappy, like blockbuster Western film.
Right. It's not even that. It's a B movie. He was a B actor.
Exactly. Right.
That the whole, It's Morning in America campaign and shit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so then I was thinking about, okay, so their backgrounds kind of determine the ways in which they might be directors, and it just seems like such an obvious connection to say that Donald Trump is a reality television star, right? So the thing about reality TV is like they're constantly filming, but they still have like story editors, and those story editors create certain situations and dramatic events that aren't there, or they heighten them or frame them in certain ways, or they script parts of it and don't script other parts. And I wonder, Josh, if you could like talk about that. Like, what does it mean to say that these kind of different political leaders are directing things differently and taking different kinds of cinematic influences? Like, as an avid, consumer of film media, like, what does that kind of say to you?
I don't know, especially grounding it in Hitler. I mean, I think it's completely apt, and I think it really ties in with film history and how you understand it in a certain light. So these executives are they're all using their power to reshape society in a certain image. So with Hitler, you had this very grandiose, very DeMille like spectacle, right? The Reichstag, everything, triumph of the will and whatnot. And then you get to Reagan, and it's this sort of like maudlin, melodramatic, just over patriotic thing, very commensurate with this personality. And I mean, it's, I feel like it's less easy to draw parallels with other leaders like in between, but I mean, yeah, now, I mean, Trump is just 100% the cheap spectacle we deserve. It's the exact image of America that everybody else in the world has had for like, the last 30 years.
We're all apprentices now.
Yep, we're all apprentices now. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not a cheap way to understand reality, because I mean, he was quoting that. I think it was like a German filmmaker, and it was in the second chapter. I See, I Fly. Moving images substitute themselves for my own thoughts, and I mean, I think that really speaks to my own experience. Like that's just the way reality is sort of framed for me. We're all cine-autistic now.
Was that like an intentional pun that reality is framed for you in that way? Or is that like a Freudian slip?
Freudian slip, definitely.
A Virillian slip.
So maybe we can take that as a segue then. If cinema is kind of like ingrained in our thoughts like this, can we talk about like the response to this like spectacular event, and like how people have like taken this and interpreted it and like run with it in some strange ways? Like the sort of like center pundit kind of take is like that now Donald Trump has emerged as presidential. Like that's like sort of their judgment of the situation, of the spectacle. That's so jacked up, but I think it has a direct line out of the cinematic understanding of the situation, that now he's sort of emerged. Like there's like he's had this like I guess I'll use like the Wesleyan word, like his heart was strangely warmed by this like sort of humanistic story. He does a thing and emerges victorious from it, and now he's the president. It's like sort of like he's evolved in a sort of like Pokemon-esque fashion to somebody who's like stronger and more powerful than he was before. And this is like a story that like I think is, I mean, we could find every other place in every other sort of like narrative arc, but like center pundits are like really eating it up, I think.
The missiles are his moonstone.
Sorry, what?
The missiles are his moonstone.
Yeah, the missiles are his moonstone. By the way, the missiles are his moonstone is the name of my next post rock album.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
By that, I don't know, kind of. I think stealing from that extremely popular leftist podcast that we all love to know. I know that the center left response I think is just, proof positive that Aaron Sorkin's done more to ruin the world than almost anybody else. Like, I mean, those, okay, like at least the common denominator for basically everybody in that camp is they're rabid West Wing fans, and they just really, really want to respect the president. And so like this has given them an excuse to respect the president.
Oh my god. Yeah. Well, so the center pundits I think are like the low hanging fruit of hot takes. Right?
Oh yeah.
Like Chap already did it. Whatever. That's fine. What about the responses from like actual leftist Twitter? I think those have been pretty interesting too. So
Yeah, I agree.
I've seen a lot of sort of like tankies and tanky adjacent tendencies coming out now, like very pro Assad, and that is that's also kind of weird to me. So do you think that leftist response is also cinematic in nature, or comes from this like cinematic understanding of the situation?
I mean, yeah, I'd say absolutely. Like, I mean, we want to, right. I mean, the whole situation in Syria, and to a greater extent, like if we want to like lump it in with the entire war on terror, is that it resists sort of a, really neat good versus evil narrative. And we all want to find the bad guy, and we all want to be confident that we know who the bad guy is and that we're doing all we can to fight him. And the fact is in Syria that there's not really a good guy, there's not really a bad guy, just people doing various degrees of good and bad things, and it's mostly bad things
So, like, one thing I found really interesting, though, is trying to piece together, exactly what's going on in Syria and how it relates to this particular decision, right? So the U.S. has sort of decided that it's going to attack Assad, and that's made a lot of people very upset and a lot of people very happy. One way of kind of cutting through that cinematic narrative, for me at least, has been kind of trying to pay attention to these networks of solidarity that are like transnational, and maybe like they don't necessarily transcend a spectacle by any means, but like I guess you could say they like give you a different angle. So I'm thinking specifically about, on the one hand, communist parties that are sharing information coming out of communist parties in Syria, and then on the other hand, the Roman Catholic Church. Which also there have been some really good journalistic pieces about like priests on the ground in Syria, what they think about it, and then also like there have been some stuff about historically like what are the Vatican's relations to Syria. And I think what I find so fascinating about that is, so there's a really interesting coincidence of opinions here between Christianity and the left, well, between Catholicism and the left, where like a lot of them both on both sides of that both of those groups, a lot of them say, listen, like, yeah, Assad does bad stuff, and that's not good. But at the end of the day, like, it's a choice between, like, Assad and ISIS. And there was, like, a spokesman from the Vatican who was like, if we have to make that choice, then we're going to choose Assad. And so, like, Benedict and Pope Francis have both have, like, diplomatic relationships with him, in their complicated way. And it's the same with like the left, like Assad, there are obviously some like really hardcore like pro-Assad stands, which is kind of weird.
Oh man, I heard Jeremy Scahill's podcast. He'd interviewed Dennis Kucinich, and Kucinich is like, oh man, just pro-Assad. He's like, before Syria was this like pluralistic society where people could worship as they wanted, and
yeah, I mean,
maybe that more or less true, but
who knows? Like,
really.
I don't live in Syria. I have no idea.
Right,
but like,
yeah,
as a like
strange.
tentative thing, yeah, it's very strange. It's like as a tentative thing of at least being like, okay, well, maybe we should do a double take, thinking about like what's coming out of the kind of groups of people who are basically committed to international groups of people. I don't know, like I found that really interesting and kind of compelling as a way to like at least reframe the whole situation.
Yeah, like I get it at the level of like political realism. Like, you need like stabilism in regions is very important, and like, Assad versus ISIS, like I guess that like requires a type of calculation. But I guess I don't understand it at the level of solidarity, or like at the level of like Christian eschatology. Okay, so this might be this is like very pie in the sky, I guess, but like okay, so I get it, like Assad's like a stabilizing force, and that's the thing that's important, but like if we are both Christians and communists who believe another world is possible, it just seems like so silly to get caught up in like hard support for any one person as like Assad or like like anybody. It seems kind of defeatist to even focus on like that political realism of those situations, and just like it's just all bad. It's a very bad situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is true for sure. It is all bad. Yeah, I guess I don't make it out to be like we should all be like very pro, like listen, we should all be supporting Assad right now, obviously, and like close the book, right?
Yeah.
But there's something to at least, I don't know, like so Catholics, we're not like super good at eschatology. The Catholic Church, I mean, it's kind of a real politique kind of institution, for better and worse. And one way in which that operates is, trying to navigate these complexities. And I don't know, it's like, on the one hand, yeah, like we should definitely be open to a bigger horizon, and we should be fighting for that and wanting more than, say, an Assad regime could give us. But at the same time, it's like, I find like a lot of Christians use that as a way to kind of get themselves out of dealing with like the complexity of the issue on the ground, and like that seems kind of hard too, in a way. Not that that's what you're doing, but like it's a thing.
No, but it's definitely like a fear, and that's why I said it was kind of like pie in the sky. Like, well, shouldn't we just be really worried about the second coming or whatever? But I guess what I really mean is like, if we think that another world is possible in both the Christian and the communist sense, I mean, like, shouldn't we really be hoping that the Kurds can do something very good?
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, like, if we're talking,
I've lost all hope since Piss Pig Granddad left.
I've actually gained more hope since he's come back. No, he's good. He's a good person, I suppose.
Extremely good.
Yeah.
Jake Gyllenhaal's gonna play him in a movie.
Is that really true?
It's happening.
Oh my gosh.
It's they're basing it on the Rolling Stone article. It's gonna suck. It's gonna be terrible because they don't understand what's actually good.
That is just like the most funny thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
I know, yeah. It's like they're gonna be, like I think it was some like Vanity Fair article, but they're like, yeah, we just want to understand these rebels that just went out there to like live a dream because they're anarchists or something. And it's like, okay, if you're like, I don't know. I want the real Piss Pig Granddad movie where it's just this like, bumbling Jewish kid who has like nothing better to do. I don't know. They're going to make a drama out of it when it needs to be more of like an absurdist comedy.
So the last thing I want to do is derail this very important conversation. But I was just thinking, like, we've talked a lot about war and cinema from the cinema angle, right? So like it's a lot of things are cinematic, etc. But the other part of this book is about like war and developments in war technology. And it's very scary. Like, so I'm going to read the last line of this book, and then we can kind of work backwards from it, maybe, and piece it together a little bit. So the last line, the last few lines, I'll like back up a little. He says, last summer, on the 5th of July, 1983, an American KC-135 aircraft fitted with a laser system shot down a Sidewinder missile traveling at 3,000 kilometers an hour. Scan, freeze frame. So, like, it is very chilling. Just the freeze frame line, I don't know, it, like, freaked me out when I read it. And we should, like, talk about why that is scary and, like, why this book prepares you to read freeze frame, which is a kind of common, like, it's something you can do on your TV remote. Why, like, that would be suddenly, like, very terrifying.
Right, it's the ultimate development of war technology, which, I mean, he even said in the preface, like, he was like, okay, so the correlation between, like, weapon has been this, like, further, or this closer identification between the weapon and the eye. So, as he sort of tracks, like, technological development, like, this was written in like the late 80s during what was it, Reagan's Star Wars, like, satellite mounted laser beams to shoot down nuclear missiles. So it's like going from like projectile to pure optics, pure light, like that laser shooting down a Sidewinder missile. I mean, vision has become so powerful it actually alters reality.
Yeah, that's right.
Without the mediation of a projectile.
Yeah, it's light weaponized. Yeah, that's right. The other thing about, I mean, the freeze frame part, I think that you're right, Dean. It is pretty chilling. Insofar as it's where like the optics of warfare leave the mechanisms of optics, like the different technologies, and enters like the phase of editing. I guess to me, yeah, I know, right? It says something about like, well, now someone can step in, freeze frame. Okay, that missile, not that one.
Oh my gosh!
Right.
It's like worse. You're making it worse.
Well, it's exactly like that quotation from the preface, like, to be seen is to be lost forever, and like, that's the end goal.
Yeah, so let's draw like a little line between that preface and the last sentence of the book, because one thing Virilio wants to say, right, is that so dictators are directors, like that's an interesting thing. Perception is important, but what he ends up going toward is to say there's this co-emergent discourse, I think is how you described it, Matt, earlier, between cinematic technologies and war technologies, and that has to do with the eye and the weapon. Could we is there a way to to take a Virillian metaphor to like describe this from 30,000 feet or something?
Well, so tying that last word, the last phrase with the preface of the book, I think. Here's another quote from the very beginning that I think is a better than like my definition or my explanation. On page 10, Virilio says, "The history of battle is primarily the history of radically changing fields of perception." And so that's what we see in this last explanation of the field of perception as like weaponized light of laser. And then also the changing of perception of like freezing time, like stopping it in place. So I think that the history of battle about being about the changing fields of perception is a good way to characterize the entire book from 30,000 feet.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it makes sense too of why these kinds of technologies are co-emergent, because he spends a lot of time on the First World War, right? And there's a big problem in that war because they build these trenches. Because ultimately, it turns out that it used to be the case that you might want like a massive show of force, like you just have like a huge army, and that's like scary enough to kind of end a battle almost. So you see the amount of armies, and he talks about how the point was to kind of move these units in a way that would be strategically useful or whatever. But then in the First World War, the point is to like disperse your people as far as possible, because you will lose if you show up in like a giant group and there's a Gatling gun on the other side of that battlefield. And so what happens is like you can't just see things with your like actual two eyeballs anymore. You have to be able to see them in these ways that your enemy doesn't know that you're seeing them. So like radar, he talks about the invention of infrared technologies. And then finally,
I do love the interrupting the anecdote about how like field commanders in World War I thought aerial photography was bullshit.
yeah, and it like screwed them over, right?
Yeah. They were getting completely decimated because they were relying on like traditional scout units, but
yeah, for sure. Let me just add like a quick note here. We've said the phrase like the coevolution of like optics, cinema, and like war a few times. Let me just give like my favorite example from the entire book, so we can kind of drive this home for anyone that's listening that might be they don't know what that phrase means, because it is kind of vague if you haven't read the book. So this is from the second chapter. It's called "Cinema Isn't I See, It's I Fly." The very second sentence in the entire in the chapter is Colonel Gatling hit upon the idea of a cylindrical crank-driven machine gun. In 1874, the Frenchman Jules Janssen, not the French pronunciation, but whatever, took inspiration from the multi-chambered Colt, patented in 1832, to invent an astronomical revolving unit that could take a series of photographs. So, like, those back and forth connections between, like, gun to camera is this coevolution categorized here. I mean, it gets much more complex as the book continues, but I think it's helpful for like kind of explaining what that coevolution looks like at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. The other sort of like broad not metaphor, but coevolution, when he gets into the broad strokes, is like World War II and earlier are sort of these properly cinematic conflicts, and as he draws it into the modern format, like the primary medium is no longer cinema but broadcasting, and you can sort of see the history of warfare become sort of more atomized, fragmented, disjointed as you move into this like broadcast era. Like it's no longer these sort of climactic meetings of two forces. It's surveillance and asymmetry and paranoia rather than bravery.
So Josh, like this book was written like almost 30 years ago, like a very long time ago in the history of cinema and war developments and technologies. And I wonder, like, so you've spent time thinking about cinema since then, right? Like in the 90s and the early 2000s and now, and also dealing with new kinds of media related, as you talked about earlier, like war video games and war films. Do you think, like, if you had to help Virilio, like, continue this story a little bit, would there be some kind of obvious connections for you, or, like, maybe some ways that the story has developed and changed?
Man, like, yeah, I feel like there'd definitely be a chapter on reality TV now. And then, like, I don't know, I mean, I feel a lot of it is just, it's so oddly prescient. I mean, he spends like a not insignificant amount of time like actually talking about video games in the text, and yeah, I don't know, I mean, the internet would be a big thing to say the least, but I mean, I think that really just follows with the broadcasting thing. It's just even a more, hyper form of that, or whatever, a more intensified version of broadcast.
I think that you're right on the broadcast note. So there's a really good Sam Chris article, shout out to Sam Chris being the best guy that I like on Twitter, called like Cars Leaving Mosul or something. This is like great short essay he has about watching the battle from Mosul live streamed on YouTube. And I think it's more of a Baudrillardian point than it is a Virillian point, but it's a really funny article, and he's just like he's watching like it on YouTube, and basically what he's saying is like it's actually very boring because it's instantaneous. There's no cuts, there's no music. It's like the worst Let's Play anyone has ever watched, and the entire time like there's like an ongoing like chat, and people are just making like bad meme jokes and like whatever. Man, I think Virilio, if he wrote about broadcast war and the internet, would be very depressed.
So he does actually write not about Cars Leaving Mosul, but about live streaming and like webcams and all that kind of stuff in later books, which is really interesting. And he does connect it, like, I don't know if you've ever read Open Sky, but that's a big one where he talks about, like, I don't know, the development of satellite imaging, and then also the ability to, like, he thinks, and it comes out here too, that one kind of trajectory of technology is that it collapses space and time completely, so that you can be in any place at any time, instantaneously. So those boundaries just don't function in the same way. And he talks a ton about that with respect to live streaming. But I've never read him talk about, like, I don't know, The Hurt Locker or something, or American Sniper or whatever. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I hate to cut this short, but we should move on to...
So maybe we should talk a little bit about Pope news this week, because the Pope has some relevant things to say about the kinds of issues we've been talking about, and also referring to kind of the internet age and what that means for war or whatever. So on Palm Sunday, he had a homily, and in it he says something super cool and interesting. So this is, after he would have known about the Syrian missile launch. So he says, this Jesus, who accepts the hosannas of the crowd, knows full well what they will soon do, knows full well that they will soon be followed by the cry, crucify him. He does not ask us to contemplate him only in pictures and photographs or in the videos that circulate on the internet. No, he is present in our many brothers and sisters who today endure sufferings like his own. They suffer from slave labor, from family tragedies, from diseases. They suffer from wars and terrorism, from interests that are armed and ready to strike. Women and men who are cheated, violated in their dignity, discarded. Jesus is in them, in each of them, and with marred features and broken voice, he asks to be looked in the eye, to be acknowledged, to be loved. That is just so awesome. And I read that after, raging about the Syria thing for a few days, and I don't know, it was so important to me to just kind of, I went to church on Palm Sunday, and to go home and think about how that's the kind of challenge Jesus makes to Roman authority, and then hear the Pope kind of go on to push it even further a little to say that Jesus is the one who was bombed, all over the planet in the last several years of not just the Trump administration but the Obama administration. That is so powerful. I just loved it.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Man, again, it's one of these moments where I think being Catholic would be very good. When you were reading that, I was thinking of the silly way that us liberal Christians always flip that equation, and people ask who would Jesus bomb, and that's a silly thing. It's a silly slogan that Christians have sort of appropriated and used or whatever, and it's supposed to be provocative or whatever. But I think the Pope does a way better job in being provocative. It's not about who would Jesus bomb, but it's about would you bomb Jesus?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think you can bomb anyone and say that you wouldn't also bomb Jesus. If Jesus comes in the least of these and the poor, then bombing, I guess, any population ends up also bombing Jesus.
Yeah, throwback to our first episode where Jacques Ellul complained that liberation theologians see Jesus in every poor person. Sorry, Jacques Ellul, you are still lame.
Yeah, very wrong. So wrong on that point. And many others.
So another item in Pope news. On the same day that Trump dropped the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, Pope Francis gave an interview to a paper in Italy, and he says in it, I think today sin is manifested with all its destructive force in war. And he goes on to say, the last century was devastated by 2 deadly world wars and knew the threat of nuclear war and a large number of other conflicts, while today, unfortunately, we are experiencing a terrible world war fought in piecemeal. The Holy Father told his interviewer, this article says, the world must stop the lords of war because those who suffer most are the last and the helpless. So I also dug that intervention.
Yeah. Also very helpful and very challenging. Last week, when we talked to Derek Ford, we opened the episode with this clip of Alex Jones talking about how the Pope was a communist, and all Jesuits, in fact, were communists. And since that is actually true, this is sort of a great rallying cry to now seize the means of production from the bourgeoisie. Dude, the Pope is so cool. He just keeps saying very good things.
Yeah, he is my papa. That's for darn sure. All right. Last item in Pope news. So Holy Thursday, Maundy Thursday. So the Pope today was scheduled to visit a prison. He's done it a bunch of other times, but yeah, he basically he goes and then he picks a variety of inmates. I think it's usually 12. This time anyway, it was 12. And he washes their feet. And in the past, he's washed the feet of, I don't know, whatever, things that drive people either insane or make them have parades. he washed the feet of like a Muslim woman, and that was like a big deal. But I think the crazy thing about it is a lot of people key in on the fact that he washes the feet of people who are not Catholic per se, which is cool. But the more important thing I think is like in this particular case, like when he's visiting a prison, it's the fact that he's washing the feet of prisoners that's like especially crazy, because he washes people's feet who are not prisoners, who are different or whatever. But here, it's the people who are in prison, and that alone is kind of like a certain kind of oppression that Christians should oppose.
Yeah, it's sort of the terribleness of prisons is definitely overlooked by a lot of Christians. So I think it's a pretty significant thing that the Pope is there and doing that type of work. It's like symbolic in a very helpful way that like these are folks we ought to pay attention to. My denomination, Free Methodism. What's up? Shout out. # Free Methodism. Shofar, rap, air horn.
Wesley, what up?
Yeah, that's right. Is a denomination that is for all you Catholics, it's a schismatic organization that split off of another schismatic organization that split off of another schismatic organization. But what's unique about Free Methodism is that it is started in America out of like abolitionist sort of urges. The sort of like the founding father is this guy named B.T. Roberts, who's a hardcore abolitionist and found like the impetus for abolition in the Bible. And I really don't see why that same logic also can't be applied to prisons. Maybe this is too hot of a take to just like drop right now. But I think prisons are very bad, and I don't know, man. The New Jim Crow is a really good book, and I think is actually very right about like the connection between prisons and slavery. But so not just the abolition of like slaves as we kind of come to understand them, but I think the abolition of prisons is very good. Is something that Christians should think about more. Obviously, not what the Pope is necessarily doing, washing the feet of prisoners, but like in that act, you see the Pope considering prisoners in ways that I think most Christians just kind of overlook. So serving prisoners, very good. Abolishing prisons, I think, even better. Okay, those are my hot takes for Pope news.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think since like my denomination is still Evangelical Free Church of America, it's my duty to say that prisons are rad and good, and everybody in them's going to hell. So.
Yeah. Well,
there's my spiel.
And all their feet are very dirty.
Oh my god.
As they should be.
Yeah.
I should note too that like before Lent, like before Ash Wednesday, Pope Francis said like explicitly that like human beings, this article says human beings construct their own prisons when they idolize economic systems that oppress other people. And just like, I'm sorry, but that is just the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. Abolish all prisons.
Yeah, dude. Set the captives free. It's in the Bible.
Yeah, it's in the Bible hard. Okay. Yes.
Oh man, I love our commie Pope.
Yeah, me too. Alex Jones, not a fan though.
Nah.
He'll come around.
What is he even? Yeah.
Just a matter of time.
What does that man even like? What brings that man joy in life?
New
Alexander
Tropics.
Jones. New Tropics.
New Tropics.
Old Tropics. I mean, how long can they be new? I think that might be the problem, actually. He has very old Tropics. Like, if he had newer Tropics, he might not be as crazy.
The shelf life is very short, yeah.
Yeah, the shelf life is like like when he pulls them out of the oven, like they are bad already.
Is that our new Tropics?
Super Male XL.
Oh my God. I ate a bowl of Old Tropics for breakfast. That's my Alex Jones impression. It's as good as my Virilio / Baudrillard impression.
Yeah.
Which, as we know, is very good.
I think that New Tropics as cereal would be a very good brand move for him.
Yeah, I agree.
Josh, can we plug your podcast in here? Is that a thing?
Yeah, it's rarely updated, but it still exists. I'm still paying for a SoundCloud subscription.
What's the title?
All right, it's the double feature. You can find it on SoundCloud. It's actually the, I think, third or fourth Google result if you search the Magnificast SoundCloud specifically.
That's what I'm talking about.
Is an episode of my podcast because I followed your account from mine.
Oh, nice. That's
but yeah,
that's what you call SEO marketing, I think.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it's gonna work out. But yeah, it's the double feature. Occasionally, me and a guest will watch 2 movies and then talk about them. It's pretty fun. Some people like it. Check it out if you like movies and occasionally clever people talking about them. Yeah.
All right, thanks for listening to Magnificast. Thanks, Josh, for being here and shooting the breeze with us. Make sure you check out Josh's podcast, The Double Feature. You can find it on SoundCloud and other places. Just search The Double Feature. Also, don't forget to subscribe, follow, thumbs up, slam dunk, like, donate to your favorite charity in the name of the Magnificast on iTunes or Stitcher or on SoundCloud. All right, thanks.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up.